What do you call an empty can of Cheese Whiz?
I don't know.
Cheese Whiz.
Hungry Squared, bringing you the best food talk anywhere.
Welcome to the Hungry Squared podcast, where the brain and belly meet. I'm Sharon from the Wasatch Cooking Guide.
And I'm Winter from theredparty.com. This week, we are talking about Sous Vide.
Sous vide? Sous what?
Sous Vide. Yep, with Jason Logsdon of Amazing Food Made Easy. We're so excited to talk to him about it finally. Let's talk about it.
Squared.
Hello, Sharon.
Hey, Winter.
What's up?
I am excited to talk sous vide today with Jason.
I know. People are probably like, what are they talking about? We'll explain it. Give us a minute.
Yeah.
It's going to be so good. How was your week?
It's been really good. How's your week?
Awesome. I'm not too tired. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good.
I'll take that.
You've been falling asleep lately.
I know. I really have been. I'm like, I need to take a nap. What'd you eat this week?
I am back on the LaCroix brand wagon.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious?
Yes, I am. I am. I went to Costco when I was hungry.
You never do that, people.
You don't.
Never. You'll walk out of there with a whole lamb. I mean,
you might. We went there for one item.
One item.
And I spent $120.
Yeah, that's what happens at the Costco.
Quote unquote, one item. So I was really hungry. We had gone to breakfast over the weekend together as a family with the boys. And I got grossed out. So I won't say where we went to breakfast.
I was actually going to ask you, but don't say, I guess.
I'm still mad about it, and I'm kicking myself for even going there. We went to a chain restaurant that specializes in breakfast.
So that narrows it down just a little.
Does a little bit. The kids really like going there, and I was like, yeah, that'd be fine, And the server had artificial nails, right? But they were like talons. They were really thick, like acrylic nails.
I'm like getting grossed out.
They were, they look like they hadn't been changed out in a while. And like they're super long. They're probably, how long would that be? That's like 4 inches, like from the
from the
top
nail
of the nail bed.
Yeah. That's really
and
long.
They kind of hooked, So, but like they're old and like you could tell they weren't new. I don't know. There's a difference, but like in food service, maybe there's not really much of a difference.
Maybe not.
But I was just, because we talk about food safety and temperatures and stuff like that on our podcast. And so it really grossed me out when I saw her deliver a hot chocolate to the table and her fingernail was in the whipped cream, but not like her finger.
Ew.
And so she put it down and then she just kind of looked at it and then just wiped it on her apron,
Ew.
Which the apron was also quite dirty. She probably had worked a double shift or something. I don't know, but it just was icky. And so I just kind of picked at my food and didn't really eat it. Like my eggs, I got eggs that were, I tried for over hard. Like I mix up how I order my eggs all the time.
Right.
Like sometimes I'll get poached, sometimes I'll get scrambled, over medium.
Mm-hmm.
So I got over hard and you could tell that the grill was dirty. So I was just like, I was not impressed and I was just so grossed out by this place. And so I just kind of picked up my food and then we went to Costco right afterward.
So you were hungry.
I was hungry.
Ugh.
And so I bought a lot of things.
And one of them was LaCroix.
And taquitos.
And taquitos.
To be fair, the boys will probably eat most of those.
Right.
But I saw that they had these big pallets of LaCroix. And I was like, oh, a coconut LaCroix just sounds so good right now. And so I got some. And now I'm on the LaCroix wagon again. Yeah.
Oh, man. I
can't quit you.
It's a thing for a lot of people still.
Yeah, that's good.
I just haven't ever gotten on it. So I've gotten on that bandwagon. I like water. Is that good? Water's good.
That's like half of it, right? The other half is the calorie-free, sugar-free flavoring.
Yeah, that's true. Well, good job, coconut LaCroix.
So it brightened my day after
not a great experience at breakfast.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
What did you eat this week?
I had some fancy beans.
You did have fancy beans. I just tried those fancy beans right before we started recording.
And it just sounds really weird when you say I had fancy beans, but we did have fancy beans. So we had some friends over and we did a barbecue just barbecue is in like burgers and hot dogs and chips and that type of thing. But
The basics.
But Lee's like, oh, we should have a side dish. I'm going to make these beans that my mom makes and these baked beans that my mom makes.
Are these Kathy's recipes?
Kathy's, yes. But Lee's kind of done a little bit of a different take, I want to say, on it. So it's a little bit of a cheater recipe because he does buy the Bush's baked beans and he buys the bourbon and brown sugar flavor version. And then he adds stuff to it.
A little sweeten.
Exactly. So he sautés up some green peppers. He chops up some green peppers and onions, sautés those up. He cuts up some bacon. Yeah. And fries that up. So it's not totally crispy. It's not that.
But it will hold its shape when you cook it.
And there's a little bit of tooth to it. So it's not like the soggy bacon. And then he gets a can of the small pineapple pieces.
Oh, okay.
And then mixes all of that together and then puts it into like a pan and into the oven at 230 and just lets it sit there for several hours. And I think they're fancy beans because if I was just making beans, I would have just gotten the Bush's baked beans and just warmed that up, right?
Called it a day.
And, but Kathy, his mother, does this kind of a situation. I don't know if does she put bacon in it? I think she does. But this last time that he made it, he added a little bit of sweet baby Ray's
barbecue.
Yes. Just a smidge of that just to kind of give it a little bit more tang to it. And it just turned out so good. So they're fancy beans because this is like way above and beyond what I would do because that's the way Lee rolls. I mean, so if you
he is a bit of a show off in the kitchen.
He is. He's like, I'm going to do this. It's going to be amazing. And people are like, what are these beans? They're fancy beans. That's what they are.
Yep.
Pretty easy. You can try it yourself. And you can be fancy too, just like Lee.
It's a really good smoky, sweet flavor at the end.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's really, really tasty. So good job, Lee. Fancy smoked beans person, you.
And now for the main course.
Okay, let's get down to our topic at hand, and that is Sous Vide with Jason Logsdon.
Yes, you guys, you are going to hear an amazing, lovely interview with Jason. We interviewed Jason. I think he was our first guest on this podcast, period.
One of them, if not the first. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But probably, yeah.
So we'll actually put a link in the show notes for his first episode, but he is great and he's so knowledgeable and he's curious too. That's the other thing that is really kind of fun about him is he wanted to learn about a certain area, modernist cooking. And so he started learning about it. And then he wrote a book about it, and same thing with Sous Vide. And now he runs this really crazy awesome website which teaches a lot of people about modernist cooking and sous videing and infusions and all of this crazy stuff.
Yeah, he even does like some of the molecular stuff like the foams and different things like that, and he's written lots of books about them, and I like the way that his books go because they're more in a conversational style and they're really accessible if you're just learning about it.
Yeah. Because I think it is a little intimidating. Some of these topics, you're like, I can't do that as a home cook. And in these books, it's kind of like, yeah, you can. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. He's really good at holding your hand and then teaching you all of the technical side of it.
Exactly. And we're focusing on sous vide today. And he'll talk a little bit more about that. You guys, sous vide's the way to go. Like, try it out. It's going to be awesome.
Hi, everybody. We're here with Jason Logsdon. He is a passionate home cook who loves to try new things, exploring everything from sous vide and whipping siphons to blowtorches, foams, spheres, and infusions. He has self-published 9 cookbooks, which have sold over 50,000 copies in both paperback and electronic formats. His books include a bestseller that hit the #1 spot on Amazon for slow cooking and the #2 spot on gourmet cooking. He also runs AmazingFoodMadeEasy.com, which is one of the largest modernist cooking websites, and SelfPublishaCookbook.com, which is a website dedicated to helping food bloggers successfully navigate the self-publishing process. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Jason, we are so excited to have you on. As you all have known, we interviewed Jason I think he was actually our first guest we've ever had on the podcast. Is that right? I feel like that's right.
I was definitely early on.
Yeah. And we met Jason at the Everything Food Conference. And for some reason, it was one of those things where we found each other via Twitter and we just hit it off. And he is all about experimenting in the kitchen. It's really a ton of fun. So if you didn't hear his previous episode on infusions, that is a great episode to check back on. But Jason, we're excited for you to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here too. I had a great time last time and looking forward to it.
Woohoo! Okay, well, the reason why we wanted to talk about sous vide today was because we actually had a listener email specifically about sous vide, and our listener was like, "Why haven't you guys talked about this? Like, what's your problem? Why haven't you talked about it?" And I was like, "Oh, we've got a guy that can talk all about sous vide." So before we begin, let's just start at the beginning. Jason, can you tell us what the heck sous vide is? And for those who are not knowing what I'm talking about, I'm saying sous vide. It's a French word, if I'm not mistaken. And it's spelled SOUS space VIDE. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so tell us what it is. Give us some details about it, and so everybody knows where we're starting off at.
Cool. So when people ask me what sous vide is, because they always ask me what I do, I tell them I write sous vide cookbooks, and they look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language, which I guess technically I am. But what I say to them so they can picture it is, if you've ever watched any of the cooking competitions that are on TV, like Top Chef or Master Chef or Iron Chef America, whenever they take the food and they put it in a bag and put it in a big thing of water, that is sous vide. And a lot of people watch those shows, so they at least have a picture of what that type of machine is. What the process itself is, it's basically precision, low temperature precision cooking. So instead of cooking food on, say, a grill that's 800 degrees, you cook it in a water bath at 130 degrees. So it's a lot lower temperatures, and it takes a longer time than the higher temperatures, but it's a pretty unique way to cook food that you can do a lot of interesting things with.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of sous vide, how the cooking technique was pioneered? I mean, I know I've seen Iron Chef quite a few times in other food shows, and they're always talking about, they're putting something in the water bath, and it gets really exciting because they're going to put it in the water bath, and you're like a little confused, but then they kind of pan out and they do something else. So can you talk about how this started, just a little bit about the history?
Yeah, definitely. Like most cooking techniques, I think there's a lot of stories how it came about, and the truth is probably somewhere in between all of them. A lot of people think that sous vide probably started back in like peasant kitchens when the fire would go out at night and they'd have a pot of stew on with meat in it, and it would basically cool down overnight, but it would still be hot enough to tenderize the meat over time. So that's how a lot of people think that it came about. As far as it being in my kitchen or on Iron Chef, Thomas Keller pretty much popularized it to current people when he wrote his Under Pressure cookbook. He uses it at French Laundry and Per Se and some of his other restaurants. So he put out the first cookbook on sous vide cooking, and through his work with Polyscience, I believe, they kind of explored some of the different culinary uses for it, including cooking food, meat and chicken, edge to edge doneness, being able to pasteurize foods at lower temperatures, and tenderizing like real tough cuts of meat without actually overcooking them. Once he started popularizing that a little bit, it got picked up in some other real high-end kitchens, and that's how it kind of worked its way into Top Chef. Once people understood the benefits and the convenience and the ability to basically produce perfectly cooked food with very little effort using it, it's now also used at like Panera to do all of their chicken. So you can go and pay $1,000 a meal to experience sous vide, or you can go to Panera and do a pick two and spend $5 and check it out as well.
I had no idea Panera was doing that. That's crazy.
Yeah, they started doing it, I think it was like 5 years ago or something. I assume they still do it, but I remember I was surprised when they got on board with that.
It's really smart because the chicken in a sous vide is dang good. And you were like, I've never had chicken this tender before. At least Yeah,
sous vide chicken's one of my favorite things I always tell new people to try that and like pork tenderloin, because they're both just super moist and super tender, and it's hard to cook it like that traditionally. Most home cooks can't cook it that well on their own, or a professional chef can, but most home cooks overcook chicken.
Yep, that's me. So Thomas Keller, he pioneered it, brought it more into the light. And was that in just when was that, this 80s, 90s?
His book came out in about 10 years ago now.
Okay.
So that was the first American sous vide cookbook that I'm aware of was his.
And he's quite an influential chef. And so I can see that really taking off. And it has in popular culture, actually. So, and now home cooks all over the world probably have sous vide machines and such.
We have readership there's a big sous vide community in Australia. We have people in England and a few people in Thailand. There's a few people in Vietnam that have sous vide that are my readers and have reached out to me. So
wow.
There's people all over.
It's really fun when you discover it. And like our reader said, like, why haven't I eaten a steak before that's been sous vide? This is life changing. So yeah. So it looks like it. Yeah. 2008. That's not very long ago. So, okay. Well, so can we talk about the science then at cooking at a kind of a lower, steadier temperature? Do you know what's going on with, for example, like if we look at a piece of chicken or a steak, what is happening? Because I know temperature affects protein fibers and such. Well, do you know what's going on there?
Yeah. So it's as meat heats, it goes through a spectrum of changes at different temperatures. And there's kind of temperature ranges that affects it. But in my mind, once you get to, let's call it 125 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, that's, from a safety perspective, that's when you start killing the bad things in your food. That's the whole point of cooking a lot of stuff is to make it safe to eat. And that's when you start killing the bacteria and pathogens that are present. So in sous vide, if you're cooking for a longer amount of time, you're always going to be cooking above 125 or 130. Once you hit that time, the hotter you get, the faster the juices come out and the more the juices come out. So if you cook something at 140, you're getting a lot more juice out of it, which is if you've had a medium steak versus a medium rare steak, or if you get up to 150 when you hit a well done steak, it's the amount of juice that's in it at that point has been reduced significantly. You also start hitting different changes at around 150, 160 degrees when you start actually breaking down other parts of the meat, like you're saying. If you cook a piece of meat at 130 degrees, you're not going to break down, the collagen and some of the components of the meat, no matter how long you cook it. So you never get like a braised texture if you cook it at a low temperature. So with sous vide, that's one of the benefits is that you can cook something like a chuck roast that you would normally have to braise for a long time. And when you braise something, you're basically cooking it to 200 degrees and squeezing all the moisture out, which is why you generally don't eat a pot roast without gravy or sauce or juices, because the meat itself is really dry at that point.
Right.
With sous vide, you can cook it at like 130 degrees, and it comes out and it tastes like a medium rare steak. So it's a steak-like texture, even though it's a pot roast that you started with.
It sounds like a poor man's way of changing different types of meat to something better.
Yeah, I love eating ribeye, but I don't make enough money writing cookbooks to eat as much ribeye as I would like. So I eat a lot of chuck steaks because they're a quarter of the cost, and if you cook it for 36 hours, it tastes almost the same.
Okay, well, now that you've said that, can we talk about times then? Because you're mentioning this low, steady temperature. How much time can I leave in a piece of meat, for example? Is there a recipe for how long, if you want a medium rare ribeye steak, do I leave it in for 3 hours at this temperature and let it go? Or can I go for longer? Can it just sit there in the water bath and be okay?
Yep, that's a great question. So there's the time and temperatures. There's two different ways to think about it. The first way is you're just trying to heat your food through, or you're trying to make it safe to eat. So if you're cooking a steak, you just have to sear it afterwards anyway. So you don't have to pasteurize it, or just why you can eat steak medium rare. So for something like that, it all matters on the thickness of the piece of meat. So 1-inch steak heats through in about an hour. 2-inch steak heats through in about 2.5 hours. And there's an easy to look up chart that you can use. We actually sell a plastic ruler that you can keep next to your sous vide machine that you can hold up to your food to know exactly how long it will take. And then the other time consideration is if you're trying to tenderize something. So if you have a chuck roast or short ribs or something else that you would normally braise or roast, that it's not something you just throw on your grill to eat because it'd be too tough, then that's when you get into a lot longer cook times. And I have tables, and all the sous vide manufacturers have tables that you can look up and see, if you want a chuck roast, here's how long you should cook it for. Because in addition to when you use higher temperatures, in addition to losing juice, it also tenderizes a whole lot faster, which is why if you use a pressure cooker, even though it's only like 250 degrees, I think, it cooks in an hour, versus if you braise something, it's 200 degrees, but it's going to take you 4 or 5 hours to do. If you drop that temperature down to 130 degrees, you're looking at 36 to 48 hours for it to actually tenderize the food. But you're not losing any juices during that process, so it comes out a lot moister.
Okay, this is really exciting because I didn't realize that there were kind of two different phases not phases, but more two different goals in mind. The first one is to heat your foods through, then you can tenderize. Like if that's your goal is to tenderize, then you can do that. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
So if you do like a filet mignon or ribeye, you just need to heat it through and then you're done. So like a chicken breast or a pork tenderloin, you need to heat it through long enough for it to pasteurize so it's safe to eat at that point. Mm-hmm. And then other things, you need to let it go for a while. The longer you hold it, the more tender it gets, which is good up to a point. But a chuck roast goes for 36 hours. If you cooked a filet for 36 hours, you'd kind of have like beef pudding, I think.
I know, I was about to say, wouldn't it be just mush?
Yeah, it would just be mush and not good. So it's not like, if you cook something on the grill, when it hits medium rare, you're like, oh, this is done. And I have like 15 seconds or 30 seconds to pull it off while it's still cooked well. With sous vide, you can overcook stuff, but it is like filet, you have an hour leeway. Ribeye, you have 3 or 4 hours of leeway. A chuck roast, maybe 10 hours of leeway. So it's a lot less time sensitive than other things, and it doesn't get ruined quickly. It's like a pork chop I really like just heated through until it's pasteurized. So it's only about 2 to 3 hours, but I got distracted working around the house, so it cooked for 6 or 7 hours, and it was a little bit drier than I like, but considering I got another 3 hours of housework done, it was still pretty perfect for, having delayed dinner by 3 hours.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about the water bath. Now, do you have to tend this water bath, or is there special equipment involved? I mean, how can it be delayed another 3 hours? What types of equipment are you using for sous vide?
So there's a few different sous vide machines. The ones that are most popular right now and least expensive they're called sous vide circulators. They kind of look like a tube of tennis balls, about that size and shape.
Wow,
and
okay.
All it is a thermometer that monitors the temperature and a heating element that circulates the water. So you set your temperature to, whatever you want, 130 degrees, and it heats your water and it holds it at that temperature indefinitely. So on a chuck steak, when you're doing it 36 hours, your actual work time is like 10 minutes beforehand and 10 minutes after. The 36 hours in the middle, you don't even have to think about it at all.
So is this part of an extra machine, or are you putting this in a pot of like a big stock pot, or how does that work?
You can use any container, basically. A lot of people, when they get started, would just use a big stock pot. I have a polycarbonate kitchen container, which works really well. It's like 12 quarts and holds, 5 to 6 chicken breasts or steaks really well. So it's a good starter size, and they're only $30, and you can get nice lids for them. So you can use anything that holds water, which is one of the convenient things about using that type of sous vide machine.
So hypothetically speaking, I could do it in my sink if I plugged up my sink.
Yeah, I've seen people do that.
Yep. That's awesome.
So to clarify, it doesn't have to be like stovetop safe, this water bath. Like it can just go on your counter or a sink or somewhere else.
For most things, you'll be fine. It's when you're cooking vegetables, you're getting up to 185 degrees, which is stuff can start softening at that temperature if you're just using like a hamper or something, I guess. But most like the steak and chicken, you're talking about 130 degrees, 140 degrees. If that's kind of like if you leave bottled water in the sun, that it's, most people's hot tap water is 130 degrees. So if your stuff's not melting in the sink when you're doing dishes, it's probably going to be fine with the sous vide.
Awesome. That's kind of good perspective, I guess. Good analogy.
I think it really is. I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because people don't understand. They see this machine and you're like, what do I do with it? Where do I stick it? How do I make my chicken cooked? And so it can be any type of container. It can usually go on your counter. It can go on your table. Most of the time, if you are getting into a little bit higher temperatures, for example, vegetables, then you may want to consider something a little bit more, maybe a trivet or something like that to protect whatever you're putting it on. So I hope everybody's kind of getting an idea of what that setup, the basic setup is. It's very simple, everybody. It's really simple. Like you can use whatever you have, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's especially with the machines now, you can get a budget machine for probably $50 to $70, or a high quality machine for $100 to $200. And it's super easy to use. And it's really, you set the temperature and you put the meat in a bag, put it in the water. And whenever the chart says that it's done, you pull it out, give it a quick sear, and it's done. And there will be one of the best preparations of that type of meat that you've ever had, probably.
I concur.
And I think there's a lot of, because it came from Thomas Keller and it came from these high-end kitchens, that people think it's this really fancy method of cooking, which is not really true. It's, if you look at like what Thomas Keller uses his oven for, that's really fancy cooking. Like every device in his kitchen puts out fancy food. So saying all sous vide food has to be fancy it's just not true. I love it for its convenience that when I'm working, I can throw some chicken in it, and then between 4 and 6 hours later, whenever my wife gets home from work, if she gets caught up in meetings or the subway's running late, dinner's not going to be ruined. Everything's still going to be perfectly cooked. I can pull it out, throw it together with some sides, and it's a great meal. And I didn't have to spend any time or energy on it. And that's really my favorite part of sous vide. You can do amazing, fancy things with it, but for everyday cooking, it's super easy and super convenient.
It totally is. Oh, okay. One thing I do want to bring up though, and we keep talking about chucking in like, put in the chicken in the water and da 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 da. You are putting the chicken into a bag of some sort and sealing that off first and then putting into the water. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Explain more about that.
You can ask a question. That's good.
Well, I was gonna just mention also, because this is one thing that I think my husband Lee does when he does our sous vide, whatever steak. But he also throws in a bunch of spices. Or one time he threw in a whole thing of rosemary, I think, into whatever he was making, and the flavors permeated that piece of meat really well. Can you talk a little bit about seasoning? And you're not just necessarily putting straight piece of chicken. You can do some things with it that will help out the flavor in the end, right?
Correct. Yeah, I do. Especially for weeknight meals, I have a lot of spice rubs, and I'll, put a spice rub on the chicken, seal it in the bag, and cook it. And it evenly coats the surface of it. It adds a lot of flavor to it. I often do rosemary, put in some orange peel or lemon peels, fresh herbs, things like that work really well. There's a few things that don't work well with sous vide. There's raw garlic and raw ginger and onion. You think of, you add those to, if you're making roast beef or roast chicken, you put those in and it adds a lot of flavor. But because the sous vide temperatures are so low, they never actually cook. So it technically works, but it never cooks the garlic. So you're just permeating your food with raw garlic flavor, which normally isn't what you're looking for with that.
So it's pretty sharp is what you're saying, because the heat isn't breaking down the vegetables at all.
Yeah, you don't get any of that nice caramelized, nutty, mellow flavor. It's raw garlic flavor. But in general, a lot of stuff goes really well with it. And I use seasons and spice rubs a lot. Some people are purists and they say you should only use salt on it, but I like spice rubs, and I tell people to do what makes them happy in general. So
Nice.
as long as you're following the safety guidelines, then do what makes you happy.
Okay, so along the lines of safety, are there specific types of plastic bags that you use? Because that's what we're putting into the water bath. You put your food into the plastic bag that goes in the water bath. So what are some safe, quote unquote, plastic bags to use?
So you want to use bags that are rated for basically for food safety and that are fine with heat. Almost all of the Food Saver vacuum sealer bags are. Ziploc freezer bags are. So that's what, when people are getting started, I recommend just using Ziploc freezer bags.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's super easy to use. If you have a Food Saver vacuum sealer, then use that because it works great. Despite the word sous vide means under pressure, so people think of it as this vacuum cooking, but the vacuum doesn't really have anything to do with the technique itself. It's just you don't want the food surrounded by air. You want the water to be as close to the food as possible because water transfers heat much, much more efficiently than air does. So you want the heat to go into the food, not to be kind of around this insulated air pocket. So that's the only thing that the bag does or the vacuum does, is get rid of the air.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, if you are a beginner sous videer, that's not a word, I don't think, but oh well.
I use sous videer and sous videing.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So if you are just using, say, for example, the Ziploc freezer bags, how do you recommend people get rid of the air pockets so that you get a pretty decent seal?
So it's a really neat trick. It's the water displacement method. If you put something in a Ziploc bag and then seal the entire bag except for maybe an inch in one of the corners, and then you put that bag underwater except for that corner, the water shoves all the air out, and it basically, you have a vacuum seal.
Excellent. Okay. I just wanted to, that was one of those Captain Obvious questions I wanted to ask, but I just wanted to make sure because that's the way we do it, because we use just the Ziploc freezer bags too. We're kind of cheap, Jason. So
I used them for the first 5 or 6 years, I think. So.
Yeah. I mean, they're super handy, and I never forget to get them when we're at the store. So it's nice to have that option.
Another Captain Obvious comment about that. If you're cooking at a higher temperature, make sure that you either use like a wooden spatula or something and not your hands to put the bag under the water. Because once you get to like 150 or 170, it's hot enough that it hurts.
Oh, yeah. That's a good Captain Obvious tip.
I've done that before. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is not 130. This is not hot tap water.
Yeah. This is a little bit warmer than that. So, Jason, I had a quick question. When you mentioned the ones that the machines that are out there right now, you said that it's a thermometer, and then there's basically a heating element that keeps the water at a certain temperature. Is there anything that helps circulate the water in this big stock pot that we've filled up? Or is it is it simply just a heating element and the temperature, the thermometer?
Most of them have some sort of water pump or propeller under there to help circulate the water.
Okay, good. Because I was like, there's got to be some hot and warm pockets and cold pockets in water if it's not circulated and your container's quite large. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
And some of the manufacturers that make machines that don't have circulation talk about you get a lot of thermal currents in the water. If you're heating water from the bottom, the hot water goes to the top and you start getting circulation from that. So I'm not sure how much that's them trying to, marketing spin, but that they do talk about that. And it makes sense to me theoretically that would create some circulation.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, for the people that are like, well, is it really worth it to get a machine? Is there a way to try sous vide without buying a machine?
Yep. There's a few ways you can do it at home with
Let's
nothing.
Hear it.
You don't want to do like the 36-hour chuck roast. That's not what I would recommend. But you can do a lot of the shorter cooks. Like if you do a chicken breast, it can take like 2 to 3 hours. Steak is for a fillet or a ribeye, you can do steak in 1 to 2 hours. So some of those you can easily do at home. You can either get like a stock pot and put it on the stove and use a thermometer to measure the temperature and try to keep it around whatever the 130 or 140, whatever temperature you want. Other people will get like a mini beer cooler. They have the smaller size beer coolers, and they'll fill that with the hot water, and that will hold the temperature for several hours, as long as you check it every once in a while and maybe put in another, a cup of boiling water to raise the temperature a little bit. You can do some good short to medium term cooks in a cooler as well. And that will kind of give you you can taste the food and taste the difference and decide if it's something that if you enjoy the flavor of it, then you can spend the money to get a machine that makes it dead simple instead of having to do a little bit of work.
That's awesome. The cooler trick is something that they use down south for crawfish boils.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So for beginners, are there things that shouldn't be done or aren't as good in sous vide and some that are just the best?
So there's like a trending method of cooking. People use sous vide for everything, basically, because they're trying to use it in a lot of cases. And you can do a surprisingly large amount of stuff with sous vide, but it's better to approach it that it's just another cooking method. So when you're approaching a recipe, in my mind, you should think about what am I trying to accomplish with this recipe and what's the best way to do that. And, you can use a grill for baking pies or for making pizza or, pretty much anything that you can use an oven for or a stovetop, but some things are easier in an oven. So you wouldn't use a grill for it most of the time. So I think approaching sous vide like that makes sense. There's some ways that you can use it to make really good, tender braised-like meat. So like doing a good brisket or pulled pork, but people try to replicate, traditional smoked pulled pork using their sous vide machine, and you can't. You can get close to it, and some people actually like it a little bit better, but you can't replicate smoking something for 8 hours by cooking it in a plastic bag in water for
right.
36 hours. A lot of people use combination methods and stuff like that, but it's that mindset of people try to do everything better using sous vide, and I don't think that's always the best use of it. For things that people really enjoy and what it shines at, the one is, like I was saying, the chicken or the pork tenderloin, because we didn't get into this too much before, but as soon as the temperature hits 130, I was saying the bad stuff starts dying, which is what you want. And we're taught in America that if you are cooking a chicken breast, you need to cook it to 150, 160 degrees for it to be safe to eat. And the part of that equation they leave out is that it's not the temperature that matters, it's the temperature and the time that it's at that temperature that matters. So at 160 degrees, everything in the chicken will be killed in a few milliseconds. And that's why the US government recommends that you cook things to that temperature. Because as soon as it hits that temperature, everything's dead. There's 300 degrees outside, everyone would be dead, basically.
Right. That makes sense.
Arizona gets up to 130, and then we start, people have to get inside because it's dangerous to be outside for a long period of time. So you can cook that chicken at 135 degrees for 2 hours, and it will be just as safe as if you cooked it to 165 degrees. And that's one reason why you can get super moist chicken, because you can eat the equivalent of like a medium rare or medium steak instead of having to eat the well done, like the chicken always is that we ate growing up.
That makes a lot of sense if you're cooking it at a lower temperature, that it's going to still kill the bacteria and stuff if you're cooking it for a longer amount of time.
Yeah, we actually talked to Martin Earl from ThermoWorks. He talked about specifically about it's not just a matter of time and it's a temperature. It's a temperature and time combination to make sure that your food is safe. But this makes a lot of awesome sense. So that you don't have to overcook your food, and it's just better. So
that's the reasons why the chicken and the pork is so much better, because it's, especially chicken, you never would eat chicken cooked at that temperature traditionally, just because we have to kill the stuff that's in our chicken here in America, and so you have to cook it in traditional methods. You have to cook it to a higher temperature, and if you cook it at 140, has so much more moisture in it, and it's so much more tender and juicy, and I love it. It's that and turkey and pork. Tastes different than anything you can do with another method.
Yeah. It's about quality of life, right? Food is good when it is done very well. So
And the best part is it's convenient and you don't have to pay attention when you're cooking it. So you never overcook it. So
Yeah, exactly.
tasty and easy. That's my favorite combination.
It really is. Hey, so Jason, I have a quick question. I've mentioned this on our podcast in previous episodes about how we have a Hamilton Beach. It's a combination slow cooker and a sous vide. And so it looks like a slow cooker. It's not your traditional kind of like your stick Anova or, your Joule. These are brands of sous vide machines, circulators. Are there any other types that I'm missing? Because like I said, I usually see them in like the shape of, like you mentioned before, just a tube of tennis balls. And that's about it. That clips onto the side of whatever pot you're using or container you're using. I have, like I said, and Hamilton Beach has one that looks like a slow cooker. Is there anything else, any other versions of a sous vide that you've seen out there?
Yeah, there's a few. They basically break down into the stick circulators, like the Joule and the Anova are the two big ones there. Gourmet has another one. I use the Joule at home, and my dad uses the Anova at home. They're both really good devices. There's the generally referred to as like a water bath, which is like the Hamilton Beach. Sous Vide Supreme makes a really good water bath. Then there's a few that do interesting combination type cooks. There's a Olaso, I think is how you pronounce their name, but they have it's actually an induction burner with a water bath on top of it. So you can take the water bath off and use the induction burner for searing or for other stuff. And there's the Mellow came out, which it's a kind of looks like a small fish tank, but it can also cool the water. In case you want to, delay the start on one of your meals, you can hold it at refrigerator temperatures for like 4 hours and then start it remotely when you're in the office. So those are some of the main ones that are out there.
And have you enjoyed having the Joule then?
Yeah, we get a lot of machines to test, and so that's kind of how I break it down. Is after the testing, what stays on my countertop, and the Joule's the one that I've kept using for a long time. I use the Anova as my backup, and I use that a whole lot too, and that's what I bought for my mother-in-law. It's a little easier to use, I think, for her than the Joule, which you have to control with a smartphone.
Awesome, because the Joule is done by Chef Steps. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the more powerful machines that we tested, and it's also quiet, which most people don't care about. But I live in New York, and so my office at home is in my kitchen, so it's something that might not matter back when I had a nice house in Connecticut. Now it's like, well, it's 10 feet away from me for 8 hours a day. So it's even a minor hum you're like,
I got to stop that. Okay, well, that's cool. And a couple of, I know that Sharon touched on this. You mentioned, and when she asked of like, what are some really good things that sous vide shines? And you mentioned chicken and the pork tenderloin. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on seafood, because I've heard seafood is a little tricky in the sous vide.
So seafood, I would say one of the things that is hard to do is like pan-fried seafood, baked seafood. It's hard to do the equivalent of that. Where if I do a chicken breast for you or a ribeye and I served it to you and didn't tell you how I cooked it, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's just a really, really well-cooked chicken breast or steak, because it tastes just like you would if you pan-fried it or grilled it. Where fish, because it's cooks really fast in like 30 minutes generally, you can't really sear it afterwards, which is something you have to do with almost all sous vide food. You want to, because it's a low temperature, you want to put it on in a really hot pan to get a nice crust on it so it has the really good flavor. And in fish, if you do that, you're now going to overcook it completely because it's so thin and heats so fast. So it's hard to do that type of fish, but I think it is really good for the equivalent of poached fish or steamed fish or like sashimi style. There's like a warm sashimi. If you do salmon at like 110 degrees, it's like firms it up just a tad. So it tastes like sushi, but it's a little bit firmer and it's warm, which is brings out a little more flavor to it. So you can do some neat things like that with fish, but I wouldn't want to try to replace like a pan-fried trout, because it's really more of a poaching method for fish.
That actually kind of sounds like a fun idea. A slightly warmer sashimi. Just because a lot of people who say they don't care for things like sushi because it's raw, I think it's more the cold texture and knowing that it's just this cold fish versus like just a slightly warmed up sashimi sounds really good to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you drink good scotch, you don't want to drink it over ice because you don't get as much of the aroma and flavor, and it's heating up the fish just a little bit, releases, I think, some of those aromatics that are in it and gives it a slightly more pleasant taste, I think. But it's one method that's, pretty interesting that people don't usually think of.
That is really smart. Okay, and then I'm going to make a confession about our sous vide uses. We generally use it for meat. And we have never made anything vegetable-like in our sous vide. Can we do? Okay, help me through this because I don't know if I'm just scared of it or what. But what do you make vegetable-wise in your sous vide?
Whatever I'm testing for my latest cookbook, and that's about it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's some things that are nice that I use, like that are vegetable. There's some things that are good with the vegetables, but in general, it's cooking a lot of the meat. Tastes so much better than using traditional methods, at least the way that I use traditional methods, that I struggle to cook not using sous vide now. because I'm just like, the chicken's fine, but it's overcooked compared to what would be sous vide. Vegetables, I'm like, they're good. I don't know. They're fine, and some people use it for them a lot. But I'm just like, it's easier to roast them or throw them in a pan and saute them real quick. So I honestly don't do hardly any vegetables unless I'm recipe testing.
Gotcha.
For a book, and they turn out really good. But it's just not I don't think it transforms the food as much as it does the meat.
With the meat, yeah. And maybe that's the reason why we haven't done that with vegetables is because I'm like, it really shines in the meat department, everybody. I'm just saying it really shines. But yeah, it's kind of easy to do vegetables and other preparation methods. So
one of the weird things that I use it for, I was doing it for recipe testing, and I stuck with it, is that I eat a lot of oatmeal in the morning. And if you've ever done like steel cut oats, that it gets goopy on the pan, and then sometimes it boils over, and you have like 8 things to clean, and it's just like such a hassle all the time that I actually cook all my oatmeal in a mason jar using sous vide now, because there's no cleanup, and I just chill the mason jar and keep it in the fridge, so I can cook enough for the next 3 or 4 days, and there's no cleanup, no scrubbing, no having to watch it, and it's something that I was just kind of doing because I thought it'd be something weird to try, and now I use it once or twice a week.
So these are steel cut oats you're using in the mason jar in the sous vide, the water bath, right?
Yeah.
And they don't come out gluey or anything because you're cooking them at the lower temperature for longer?
They come out about the same texture as they would in the pan. There's just no cleanup, and I don't have to watch it while it's cooking for 30 minutes on the stove. So it's just the convenience of it. Just toss them in with water in a mason jar and don't think about it for 45 minutes, and then they're good to go.
Oh, nice. So it's a similar cook time too. That's great.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay. I might have to get that recipe from you. I mean, it sounded pretty easy, but maybe you have a recipe.
On my website,
Is it? Okay. I'll put a link in the show notes then, everybody, because I'm going to try that now. Because yes, it's totally true. Oatmeal can get everywhere, and then you're like scraping it off days later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You've asked a few times about what people, when they get started, would be interested in. If there are any people listening that have recently got a sous vide machine and are curious, I do have an article I can give you to put in the show notes. That's my suggestion for the first things to cook when you have a sous vide machine, that steps you through, like if you want the best version of something, or if you want a unique version of something you can only use with sous vide, and it kind of breaks it down so you can get a good feel for experimenting with your machine.
I hear you also have a class. Is that true?
That is true. I have an online email course that's free. It's, I think, 20 emails over a few months get sent out to you, and it steps you through everything from what is sous vide and the safety aspects and what the time and temperature is, a lot of stuff we've talked about today, and what machine you should buy, and then steps you all the way through the best way to cook meats and chicken and pork and vegetables. And kind of the goal is that if you know nothing about sous vide, but you're interested, sign up for the course. And by the end, you'll be very comfortable making almost anything in sous vide.
Okay. And where can we find that?
So it's on my website, but I'll give you a link to put in the show notes. But if you go to afmeasy.com/hungry squared, I'll have it redirect to it for you.
Perfect. That is awesome. Because I'm going to sign up for that because that's awesome. And you did mention, because you talked about your cookbook, a very recent cookbook that you just came out with. People, you don't know this, but we've been trying to get Jason on our podcast for months now. And today the stars finally aligned. So, and this cookbook was coming out when we first attempted to have him on the podcast, which is very sad to say that it's taken this long.
Difficulties, and
I know
I was sick and Sharon was sick.
Yeah, it's been a rough. I mean, and so we're so happy that you're on our podcast today. So, but you have a new cookbook, Healthy Sous Vide.
Yes, Healthy Sous Vide. It's a lot of, I think it's probably my favorite cookbook that I've done, and I'm really proud of a lot of the recipes in it. It has a lot of good sauces, and I think it's a lot of good recipes that you can eat everyday style cooking that's healthy, but it's still really filling and really flavorful, because I love eating bad food, but I can't as much as I used to. And so I tried to come up with recipes that when I eat them, I'm not disappointed that I'm eating, quote unquote healthy. I feel satisfied and really full at the end, but it's a lot better for you.
Yeah, it looks super yummy. I'm kind of excited about it. So
I hear that you are game to do a giveaway with our listeners. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely. I'd be happy to give away a few signed copies.
Woohoo! So Jason, thank you so much for letting us do a giveaway to our listeners for this couple of signed copies of this Healthy Sous Vide cookbook. We're excited to give that away. So Jason and I / maybe Lee or both of us, I don't know. We're going to be doing a Facebook Live this week. And so just look out on our Facebook page, facebook.com/hungry squared. And we just jump on and make a comment and ask questions and everything like that. And you'll get entered into winning one of those copies of a sous vide cookbook by Jason.
And don't worry if you don't catch the live feed of the video. We'll leave it up for a little while so you can make comments on that too.
We'll just put the information on that post. So Jason, thank you again. Thank you so much. This was so interesting and a much requested topic from our listeners. And so thank you so much for taking the time today. We're glad the stars aligned and we're all healthy and that you could talk about sous vide tonight.
Yeah, I had a great time. I'm really glad I could make it back on. It's always a real fun time being on your podcast.
We love having you on. So thank you. Thanks for joining us today for our show. You can find us at hungrysquared.com, on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and now on Spotify.
Woohoo! Hey, everybody, once again, we did not have a food fight question because we really wanted Jason to have as much time as possible on the podcast today. So, and like we said, we're going to have a giveaway, but it's going to be on Facebook Live. So look out for our event / Facebook Live video that's going to happen. You can join us in person if you'd like to, or you can, we'll have the video up and we'll have it open, the contest open a few days afterward. And all you have to do is drop in a comment or say something about the video so we know you're alive, that kind of thing.
And you will be entered to win a signed cookbook of Jason's new cookbook, which is called Healthy Sous Vide.
Yep, it's going to be awesome. So follow us at facebook.com/hungry squared to look out for that video, and join us next week for our next episode of Food Nerdery.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Bye.
Hungry squared, yeah, hungry squared.